You know that feeling when you upgrade the operating system on your phone? You're excited. It's supposed to be faster, slicker, better.
Sure. New features,
Yeah.
shiny interface, everything is supposed to just work
Right.
smoother.
But imagine you install that new OS, but you try to run all your old apps exactly the way they were set up for the old system, and suddenly it's just glitch city.
Hmm.
The battery drains in an hour. The inputs where you tap on the screen, they just don't register the way they used to. The hardware is fine, the apps are fine, but the system isn't talking to them correctly.
It's a compatibility error, a classic one. The underlying code has changed, but the user, the way you behave, hasn't.
Exactly. And that is the metaphor we are starting with today. Because we're looking at a phenomenon that I think keeps a lot of, HR directors, medical boards, and global executives up at night.
Oh, absolutely.
You hire a superstar, someone who is just technically brilliant, maybe a surgeon from Lagos, a software architect from Bangalore, or a finance director from Hong Kong. Their IQ it's off the charts. Their resume is perfect.
On paper, they are the solution, the top talent that everyone is fighting for.
But then you drop them into a new environment, say a hospital trust in London or a boardroom in Toronto, and the gears just grind. They struggle. They're misunderstood. Their authority doesn't land.
And the lazy assumption, the really dangerous assumption, is usually, oh, maybe they aren't as competent as we thought.
Which is almost always the wrong conclusion. It's tragic, really.
It is. It's usually not a competence gap. It's a fluency gap. And
Yeah.
just to be clear, we are not talking about English language fluency. You can speak perfect
Yeah.
Queen's English and still be culturally illiterate in a British boardroom.
We aren't talking about vocabulary flashcards here. We're talking about what our source today calls the silent operating system of leadership. We are doing a deep executive review of a book called Cultural Fluency Without Compromise, Thriving Across Cultures with Presence and Integrity.
And it's by Dr. Promise Monday. And Dr. Monday is, the perfect guide for this. He isn't writing from some university tower or a theoretical HR perspective. He's a consultant pediatrician, a fellow of the West African College of Physicians, and he now practices in the UK's National Health Service.
So he is writing from the trenches. He's lived this.
Exactly. He writes from what he calls the space between cultures. He has lived that transition from a high-context, direct culture to a low-context, diplomatic one. He's felt that friction personally.
Okay, so here's the mission for this deep dive. We are going to move way past the basic etiquette tips. I don't care which fork you use or the proper angle of a bow.
Right, that's all surface-level stuff.
We're going into the deep psychology of leadership identity. This is for the leader who walks into a room and feels that tension, that question of, do I have to become someone else to succeed here?
And that is the central question, isn't it? It's this tension between fitting in and integration. They sound similar, but they are worlds apart.
So what's the difference?
Well, Dr. Monday's thesis is very clear. You do not need to compromise your identity to be culturally fluent. In fact, if you do compromise, if you erase who you are, you break the very thing that makes you a valuable leader.
But that's easier said than done, isn't it? Just be yourself is terrible advice if yourself is currently offending everyone in the meeting.
Chuckles. It is terrible advice in a vacuum. Yeah.
Yeah.
Context matters.
Yeah.
And that leads us to the first big theme, the identity crisis.
Okay.
The source material really highlights this internal monologue that so many people face, not just international medical graduates, but global executives too. It's this deep-seated fear of selling out.
It's that voice in your head asking, if I change the way I speak, if I change how I act, will I still be me?
Precisely. Imagine you've spent 20 years building a persona of authority. In your home culture, maybe you lead with a booming voice, with direct commands, with high energy. That is what the boss looks and sounds like.
Right, that's how you signal competence.
Then you move to a culture where authority is whispered, where it's understated, where being loud is read as lacking control, or even being unstable.
You feel like you're shrinking, you feel like you're putting on a costume, and it just doesn't fit right.
You start thinking, if I lower my voice, if I stop being so direct, am I still me? Or am I just an actor playing a part? And Dr. Monday distinguishes between two ways of dealing with this fear: performance versus transformation.
Okay, that's a key distinction. Let's break those down. What does performance look like in this context?
Performance is acting out a script to survive. And it is driven entirely by the fear of judgment. It's that feeling of constantly scanning the room.
So you're always on edge.
Always. You're thinking, am I being too loud? Am I being too aggressive? Did I smile enough? Did I make too much eye contact or not enough? You are actively suppressing your natural instincts to fit into a mold that, well, that doesn't fit you.
It sounds incredibly draining. Just thinking about it is making me tired.
It is the fast track to burnout because you are essentially hiding. You're spending, let's say, 40% of your cognitive energy just monitoring your behavior, which means you only have 60% left for the actual job.
For the surgery or the strategy or the negotiation.
Exactly. Performance is unsustainable because it is, at its core, subtractive. You are cutting parts of yourself off to fit in the box.
Okay, so if performance is the trap, what is transformation? How is that different from just acting better?
Transformation is purposeful growth, and it's rooted in your existing identity. This is key. The analogy Dr. Monday uses, and I think this just unlocks the whole concept, is translation. Think about translating a masterwork novel.
Okay, like translating, I don't know, Shakespeare into Japanese or something.
Right, or Chinua Achebe into French. If you translate a great novel, you have to change the words. You change the grammar, the sentence structure. You might even have to change an idiom because it's raining cats and dogs makes zero sense in Paris.
Sure, you'd find a local equivalent like, it's raining ropes.
Exactly. But, and this is the absolute key, do you change the meaning? Do you change the soul of the story?
No, of course not. If it changed the meaning, you haven't translated it, you've rewritten it. You've actually destroyed the original.
Exactly. So cultural fluency is translating your leadership intent into a behavioral language that your new audience can actually receive and understand.
So it's about the outcome.
It's all about the outcome. If you're a direct leader, your intent is clarity, honesty, getting things done. In Lagos, you might express that by saying, "This is wrong, fix it." But in London, to convey that same intent effectively, to actually get the result you want, you might need to translate it to something like, "I'm concerned this approach might have some risks we haven't considered yet. Could we explore that?"
See, to a lot of people, especially straight shooters, that second version feels like softening the blow. It feels like weakness, like you're playing office politics.
But that's the mistake. It's looking at the words, not the impact. It's not weakness if the outcome is that the team actually listens and fixes the problem.
Yeah.
If you use the Lagos method in a London office, what happens?
The team shuts down, they get defensive, they feel attacked.
Right. They don't hear, "Fix the problem." They hear, "He's attacking us and he thinks we're idiots." So the message is completely lost. Transformation is realizing that by changing your delivery, you're actually preserving your authority, not losing it. You're ensuring your intent lands.
So adaptation isn't betrayal, it's translation. That's a really strong frame. It makes it a skill rather than a submission.
It expands your capacity. It adds to who you are. You now speak two leadership languages. You haven't lost the first one. You've just gained a second one.
This leads us directly to this concept of the third space or third culture. Now, I've heard this term used for third culture kids, people who grow up in lots of different countries, but Dr. Monday is using it a bit differently here, right?
Yes, very much so. In this context, the third culture or third space isn't a geography. It's not a place on a map. It's a psychological operating state.
Okay.
It's an identity where you merge the strengths of your roots with the systems and norms of your host culture. You're not one or the other. You're both.
Can you give us a concrete example of what a third space leader looks like in action? How do you actually blend those things without just becoming a confused mess?
Let's stick with the West Africa to UK transition, since it's the primary case study in the book, and it offers such a sharp contrast. West African professional culture, generally speaking, of course, values a certain kind of directness, visible passion, and a hierarchy of respect.
Right. If you're the boss, you act like the boss. You don't hide your light under a bushel, as they say. Strength looks like strength.
Correct. And passion is seen as evidence of caring. Now, you drop that leader into the UK. What does strength look like there?
Understatement. Irony. Keeping calm, no matter what.
Exactly. The famous stiff upper lip. Authority is demonstrated through calm composure and diplomacy. If you shout, you've already lost the argument.
So you have two completely opposing models of leadership.
You do. Now, here's the third space solution. If you try to simply mimic the British style 100%, you become a performer. You might come across as inauthentic or even fake because you don't have the subtle coding down perfectly.
And if you stubbornly stick to the West African style,
You're perceived as aggressive, maybe overpowering, or even scary. You're not getting through.
so the third space is the hybrid, the middle ground.
It's more than a hybrid, it's an integration.
Mm.
It is the West African leader who retains their moral clarity and their courage to speak up, that's the root strength, but delivers it with a timing, tone, and diplomatic framing that allows the British team to actually hear it.
I see. So you keep the what, but you change the how.
Precisely, as the book says. Fluency is not assimilation, it is presence with flexibility.
Presence with flexibility. I love that phrase. It implies you are still there, you haven't disappeared into the background, you are present, but you are bending to the context.
It's a power move, really. You are controlling the dynamic because you understand both codes. In many ways, you're the most versatile and valuable person in the room.
Okay, so that's the mindset, that's the why. But we really need to talk about the mechanics, because the book argues that culture is a silent operating system. It's running in the background, controlling how we interpret everything, but we almost never look at the source code.
And the most important piece of that code to decipher, the binary, if you will, is the difference between high context and low context cultures. This is based on Edward T. Hall's framework, which Dr. Monday applies brilliantly to the medical and executive world.
I find these academic terms often get thrown around without people really understanding what they mean. So let's break it down really simply. What is a high context culture?
In a high context culture, and this includes much of West Africa, Latin America, parts of Asia, the Middle East, Southern Europe, communication is deeply embedded in the situation. The meaning is implied.
What does that mean, implied?
It means the meaning is in the tone of voice, the shared history between people, the status of the people in the room, the body language. Even the silence between words can carry a huge amount of information.
So if I'm in a high context meeting and the boss just sort of raises an eyebrow or goes quiet after I speak, everyone knows that means that's a terrible idea, even if he says nothing.
Exactly. You don't have to say everything explicitly because we all just know. The relationship carries the data. If I trust you and I know you, I understand what you mean, not just what you say. The words are just the tip of the iceberg.
Okay, and low context.
Low context cultures. The U.S. is the prime example, also Germany, Scandinavia, Australia. They rely on the explicit written or spoken word. Yes means yes. No means no. The message is in the data, not the relationship.
You spell it out.
You spell it out. You assume the other person knows nothing until you tell them. You put in the email. You have meeting minutes. It's all about clarity and explicitness.
Now here is where it gets tricky. The UK. Where on earth does the UK fit? Because they love written protocols and procedures, which seems very low context, but have you ever tried to get a straight answer out of a polite British executive?
Laughs. You've just hit on the British nuance, and it's a massive trap for so many global leaders. The UK sits in this unique, very confusing position.
How so?
On the surface, it values explicit rules, contracts, protocols. That's the low context part. But socially, interpersonally, it is heavily high context and incredibly coded. And this brings us to what the book calls the perhaps paradox.
Oh, I loved this section. This is where a single word can cause a complete and total breakdown in a team. Walk us through the perhaps scenario.
Okay, so imagine a meeting. You have a direct communicator, let's say a leader trained in Lagos or New York, and a British colleague. The direct communicator proposes a new initiative. We need to change the software by Friday. It's urgent.
Okay, clear, direct, low context.
The British colleague listens patiently and then says, "That is an interesting idea. Perhaps we could look at that next quarter."
To my American ears, or just direct ears in general, that sounds like, hey, there's a chance. Let's put it on the calendar for 3 months from now. It's a possibility.
Exactly. To a direct communicator, perhaps suggests possibility. It sounds like a soft yes, or at the very least a maybe. But in the British code of polite buffering, perhaps we could, or I wonder if, is often a definitive, hard no.
It's a no dress up in a tuxedo.
It is. It is a way of saying, I think this idea is terrible, but I am far too polite to embarrass you by saying so publicly.
So the direct leader walks away from the meeting thinking, great, I've got buy-in for next quarter. And the British leader walks away thinking, phew, glad I shut that down gently.
And then 3 months later, the direct leader brings it up again, and the British leader thinks, my God, why is this person so pushy? Why aren't they listening? I already told them no.
And it creates this friction that has absolutely nothing to do with the actual idea and everything to do with this silent operating system mismatch.
It is terrifying how much time and energy is wasted just decoding that stuff. But it goes both ways, doesn't it? The direct leader can also terrify the indirect team.
Oh, absolutely.
If you come from a culture where you show engagement by interrupting, which is common in some Latin and Mediterranean cultures, it's called cooperative overlapping, You're showing you're excited and you're with them.
You're building on their idea.
But you do that in a culture where interrupting is seen as the height of rudeness, and you just look like a bully. You think you're being enthusiastic. They think you're being domineering and disrespectful.
So what is the fix here? The book talks about cultural bilingualism. What does that look like in practice? I mean, do we just walk around with a dictionary of cultural phrases?
It's about learning to read the air, but more practically, it means developing and using translation scripts. The book offers these really tangible phrases to bridge the gap.
Give us a few. I love practical scripts.
Okay, let's say you're from a direct culture working in a diplomatic one. You fundamentally disagree with the proposal. Your instinct is to just say, that won't work, it's a bad idea.
Which would go down like a lead balloon.
Right. So instead, you use a script. You say something like, I may be missing something here, but my concern is.
I may be missing something. That's brilliant. It's humble. It invites the other person to correct your understanding rather than just blocking them.
Correct. It lowers the temperature immediately. It frames your objection as a contribution, not a conflict. Now let's flip it. If you are on the receiving end of a vague, perhaps, or a classic British, that's a brave idea.
Which usually means that's completely insane.
Laughs for silently.
Ah.
Precisely. You need a clarifying script. You can't just guess. You say, just to confirm my understanding, is that a yes for now? Or is that a not at this stage?
You force the clarity, but you do it politely. You're giving them an out.
You're auditing your interpretation before you walk away and act on it. It takes 5 seconds, but it can save 5 months of wasted work and resentment.
That is super practical. It's like having a phrase book for emotional and cultural intelligence.
Yeah.
Which, speaking of intelligence, I want to move to the major framework in the book, the Promise Monday Cultural Fluency Matrix.
Yes, this is the centerpiece of the executive review part of the book.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate how Dr. Monday structures this because it moves us away from vague, soft skills into something you can almost measure.
Right.
He argues that to succeed globally, you need 3 intelligences working in tandem: IQ, EQ, and CQ.
Okay, we all know IQ technical smarts, and EQ emotional smarts, empathy. So CQ is cultural intelligence.
Right. It's your ability to function effectively across diverse cultural contexts.
Yeah.
And the matrix plots EQ against CQ. We assume the IQ is already there. It's table stakes.
Yeah.
If you're a consultant or an executive, you have the technical skill. The variable is how you relate to people and cultures.
The matrix has 4 quadrants. I think it's really helpful to walk through these because you listening can probably identify your colleagues or maybe even yourself in these profiles. Let's start with quadrant 1. High IQ, but low EQ and low CQ.
This is the profile described as technically capable, socially disconnected. This is the robotic leader. They follow the protocol perfectly. They know the clinical guidelines or the engineering specs better than anyone, but they completely fail to build trust or warmth.
We've all worked for that person. They view small talk as inefficiency. They enter a room, give an order, and leave.
And in a very task-based culture like parts of Germany or the Netherlands, they might actually survive, maybe even thrive.
Yeah.
But in a relationship-based culture like Brazil or Nigeria, or even within the British NHS, which relies so heavily on teamwork, they are a disaster.
Why?
Because they're seen as cold, arrogant, or not a team player. They might be the smartest person in the room, but no one wants to follow them because there is no human connection. You don't feel safe with them.
Okay, what about quadrant 2? This one seems tricky. High EQ, but low CQ. Usually we think high EQ is the golden ticket. If I have high empathy, surely I can manage anywhere.
You would think so. But this is the compassionate but misaligned leader. They are very warm. They're genuinely empathetic. They care. But they miss the cultural cues of how that empathy should be displayed.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. Imagine a leader who is naturally very tactile and expressive, maybe from a Latin culture. They move to a culture that values professional distance and reserve, say Japan, or a very conservative British law firm.
Okay.
This leader, trying to be empathetic, might try to hug colleagues who are upset, or ask deep personal questions about their family in the very first meeting, or share their own vulnerabilities way too early.
They're trying to connect. They're trying to use their EQ.
They are absolutely trying to connect, but they are overshooting the cultural mark. Their warmth feels too intense or overwhelming or even inappropriate to the receiver. They mean well, but they make people deeply uncomfortable. They're reading the emotions correctly. This person is stressed, but their response to that emotion is culturally clumsy.
That's a fascinating distinction. You can be emotionally intelligent, but culturally clumsy. Okay, quadrant 3. High CQ, but low EQ.
This is the strategic but distant leader. This is a really interesting one. This leader understands the system perfectly. They know exactly how to bow, who to email, what the hierarchy is. They've studied the culture. They've read all the books,
Do they know all the rules of the game?
all of them. But they lack genuine emotional connection. They are polished, but it feels like a performance. It can even feel manipulative. People respect their ability to navigate the system, but they don't trust them with their vulnerability. It's transactional fluency. They can get the deal done, but they aren't building loyalty or a real team.
Which brings us to the goal, Quadrant 4.
The culturally fluent leader. This is high EQ and high CQ working together. This is the person who bridges cultures with both empathy and respect. They can read the room, that's the CQ, and connect to the people in it, that's the EQ.
What does this look like in a crisis? Can we paint a picture of this leader in action?
The book gives a powerful example. Imagine a tense meeting where a diverse team is arguing. A junior doctor from a deferential high hierarchy culture makes a mistake in how they speak to a senior consultant.
Okay, a very delicate situation.
The robot leader from Quadrant 1 would just correct the error brutally and publicly. The compassionate leader from Quadrant 2 might just feel bad for them, but say nothing to avoid conflict. The strategic one from Quadrant 3 might note it down to use later as leverage.
And the culturally fluent leader.
They intervene in the moment, skillfully. They might reframe the junior doctor's remark to preserve their dignity-saving face is huge in many cultures, while simultaneously guiding the group back to the right clinical outcome. They act as the glue. They translate the intent of the junior member to the senior and the authority of the senior back to the junior. They manage the energy of the room.
That requires a lot of cognitive processing power. You're basically playing 3D chess while everyone else is playing checkers.
It does. And that's why the book encourages a self-audit. It asks you, the listener, where do you go when you are under pressure? Because that's when the mask slips, right?
Oh, absolutely. When the deadline is in 1 hour and the system is crashing, nobody is thinking about cultural nuance.
Exactly. When we are stressed, we default to our factory settings. Some of us become robotic, just get it done, that's low EQ. Some of us become overly emotional and panicked, that's low CQ. The goal of cultural fluency isn't to be perfect when things are calm. It's to build the muscle memory so that under pressure, you can stay in that top right quadrant.
I want to pivot now to the idea of leadership identity, because there is a phrase in the book that I think should be on a billboard in every global headquarters. Leadership is not an accent.
It is such a powerful debunking of the myth of the standard leader.
Mhm.
There is a pervasive, often unconscious bias that leadership sounds like a specific thing, usually a British Received pronunciation or a confident, deep American baritone.
It's the Hollywood general voice,
Yeah.
or the BBC newsreader voice.
Right. And if you don't sound like that, if you have a heavy accent or a higher-pitched voice or a softer cadence, you unconsciously get docked points on leadership potential. Dr. Monday challenges this head-on. He says you do not need to mimic an accent to be a leader. You need to find your voice.
And he categorizes these into 6 leadership voices or archetypes. I think this is so helpful because it gives people permission to lead in a way that's authentic to them. Let's run through a few of these because I suspect many listeners are trying to force themselves into a box that just doesn't fit.
Sure. So instead of trying to be this generic standard leader, you might identify as the sage. This is the leader who leads through wisdom, through deep reflection, and most importantly, through listening. They aren't the loudest, they don't dominate the whiteboard, but when they do speak, the whole room stops and listens because they have synthesized everything.
I love that. It really validates the introverted leader who can often feel overlooked. Who else do we have?
There is the advocate. This is the leader who is driven by moral clarity. They have the courage to speak up to the unheard, to champion a cause. Their voice carries weight because it is grounded in justice and fairness. They are the ones who ask, is this the right thing to do?
Yeah.
Even when everyone else is asking, is this profitable?
Then there's the architect.
The architect leads through structure. They are the words who bring order to chaos. Their voice is reassuring because it offers a clear plan. When everyone else is panicking, the architect says, okay, stop. Here's the roadmap. Here's step 1, step 2, step 3.
And the shepherd. Sounds gentle.
The shepherd guides with empathy and presence. They lead from the back or from the side, ensuring the team is safe, cohesive, and supported. This is often undervalued in aggressive Shark Tank corporate cultures, but it is absolutely critical for long-term team health and retention.
Okay, 2 more. The catalyst.
The catalyst drives momentum. They are the energy in the room. They push for change and action. They are the ones saying, why are we waiting? Let's go. Let's try it.
And finally, the anchor.
The anchor is steady. Under pressure, They are the rock. They don't get swept away by the panic or the excitement. Their calm presence grounds the entire team.
The point here isn't just to pick one and say, that's me, like a personality quiz, is it? It's about alignment.
Yes, it's about self-awareness.
Hmm.
If you are naturally a shepherd, someone who cares deeply for the team, but you try to act like a hard-charging catalyst because you think that's what a boss is supposed to look like, you're going to fail.
You'll just sound fake, inauthentic.
Completely. People can
Ba-ba.
smell it a mile away. But if
Wow.
you own your shepherd voice and you learn to use it with cultural intelligence, you can be an incredibly effective leader in any culture. It's about naming your voice. When you name it, you stop apologizing for it. You stop thinking, I wish I was louder, and start thinking, how do I use my sageness to solve this specific problem?
Naming your voice. I really like that. But let's be real for a second. Sometimes you can name your voice. You can have high CQ, high EQ, everything. And you can still walk into a room where there is bias against you, where your accent or your skin color or your background leads people to underestimate you before you even open your mouth.
And Dr. Monday doesn't shy away from this at all. He devotes a significant part of the book to it. He calls this invisible bias
Why invisible?
because it usually leaves no fingerprints.
Yeah.
It's not an overt slur thrown across the room. It's a hesitation. It's a lowered expectation.
Yep.
It's someone explaining a basic concept to you as if you're a child, even though you have a PhD in that very subject.
It's the shifting of goalposts. You meet the requirement and they say, well, we actually need a bit more of this now.
Exactly. And that's the stuff that makes you crazy, because if you call it out directly, they can so easily say, oh, you're imagining things. You're being too sensitive.
It's a form of gaslighting.
It is. And the emotional toll of this, what he calls the weariness of being on alert, is significant. It drains that battery we talked about right at the start.
So what is the strategy? If you can't prove it, and if you explode, you just look emotional, how do you deal with it without blowing up your career?
The strategy he proposes is name the pattern, keep your footing. The first and most important rule is do not become the story. If you explode in anger, you validate the very bias that you are emotional or difficult or aggressive.
You give them the ammunition they were looking for.
You hand it to them on a silver platter. Instead, you use what the book calls emotional authority.
What on earth is emotional authority?
It is the act of deciding before you enter the room what emotion you are going to carry. You don't let the room's bias or negativity decide for you. If you encounter that bias, you don't react, you respond. And you do it with tactical phrasing.
Give us a script for that. How do you call out bias without triggering a defensive war?
So instead of accusing someone of racism or bias directly, which almost always shuts down the conversation, you focus on the impact of the behavior and the pattern you've observed. You might say, I've noticed a difference in how my contributions were acknowledged compared to others in this meeting. Can we talk about that?
That's very objective. I noticed X. You're stating an observation.
Or if someone makes a microaggression, a comment that stings, you can pause and say, what was said may not have been intended to cause harm, but here is how it landed with me.
It's firm, but it's composed. It holds a mirror up to the behavior without smashing the mirror in their face.
Exactly. It invites them to look at what they did rather than getting defensive about who they are. And this connects to a really profound distinction the book makes between kindness and niceness. This blew my mind a little bit.
Yeah, tell us about that, because we usually use those words interchangeably. You know, he's a nice guy, she's very kind. Same thing, right?
Not in this framework. Here they are almost opposites. Niceness aims to please. It avoids conflict at all costs. It wants to preserve short-term comfort. Niceness is smiling when it should speak up. It's the doctor who sees a colleague making a mistake but says nothing because they don't want the conversation to be awkward.
Ooh, yeah. In a medical setting, that's not just awkward, that's dangerous.
It can be lethal. Kindness, on the other hand, aims to help. It pursues the truth. It serves the long-term good, even if it's uncomfortable now.
So kindness might actually hurt in the short term.
Think of a surgeon. Cutting someone open with a scalpel is not nice. It's violent. It hurts. It leaves a scar. But it is profoundly kind because it saves their life. A culturally fluent leader chooses kindness over niceness, always.
So sometimes the kindest thing you can do is give difficult feedback or challenge a biased system.
Yes, but you do it with respect. As Dr. Monday puts it, you have to clothe truth in respect so it can be heard. If you are just nice, you are assimilating. You're keeping your head down. If you are kind, you are leading. You are making the environment better, even if it's uncomfortable in that moment.
That is a standard to aspire to. Clothe truth and respect. It feels like that connects all the way back to the ultimate metaphor of the book, the bridge.
Yes, the culturally fluent leader as a bridge.
I think we often think of a bridge as something you walk over it, but the engineering of it, the structure, is the whole point here.
Absolutely. Bridges don't exist to blend in. A bridge that looks exactly like the land on either side isn't doing its job. A bridge exists to hold together two spaces that would otherwise drift apart. It has to be anchored firmly on both sides, but it is its own distinct structure.
That's a beautiful image. So you are anchored in your roots, your heritage, your training, your values, and you are also anchored in your host culture, the NHS, the corporate boardroom, the new country. You are the thing that connects them.
And importantly, this is a two-way street. The book is very clear that this isn't just about the immigrant or the expat twisting themselves into knots to fit in. Host cultures, the institutions, the companies, they must also expand. They have to engage in what he calls mutual adaptation.
Right, because if you hire diverse talent but then force them to act exactly like the locals, you completely lose the diversity benefit you hired them for.
You lose it entirely.
Yeah.
You lose that third space perspective. The host culture needs to realize that professionalism can look and sound different than what they're used to. They need to widen the aperture of what leadership looks and sounds like.
So for the listener, whether they are that leader trying to navigate a new system or the person who is hiring them, what is the final takeaway? We've covered the silent operating system, the matrix, the voices, the scripts. What should they stop doing and what should they start doing today?
Stop asking, how do I fit in? That is a survival question. It puts you into defensive crouch.
It makes you small.
It does. Start asking, what am I building here? That is a leadership question.
I love that pivot from defense to offense.
And realize that you are not lucky to be in the room. You are not a guest who should just be grateful to be at the table. You are needed there. Your perspective, your third space view, allows you to see things the locals literally can't see. You can see the gaps in their system because you haven't been swimming in that water for 20 years.
So lead from substance, not from a script.
Lead from substance. And Dr. Monday leaves us with a final provocative thought that I think just sums this entire deep dive up perfectly.
Let's hear it.
He asks, if you are constantly translating your identity to fit the system, who is left to change the system?
Wow. That stops you in your tracks.
It really does. Because if you blend in perfectly, if you assimilate completely, then nothing changes. The system remains static.
The goal isn't just to survive the system, it's to integrate with integrity so that eventually the system itself becomes more fluent, more inclusive, and frankly better because you were there.
Couldn't have said it better myself. The bridge changes the landscape just by existing.
Thank you for walking us through this. This has been a deep dive into Cultural Fluency Without Compromise. It's a book that I think is going to be a handbook for a lot of people navigating these invisible waters.
It's an essential read, for sure.
For everyone listening, go name your voice. Check your matrix. Ask yourself, are you being nice or are you being kind? And go build that bridge. We'll see you next time.